God, I ask you to inspire this word. May it be heard by those who need to hear it, and may it be protected from those who only have the interest of hate and destruction. Like many people, I have been searching. I have been looking for the answers, trying to make sense of things, trying to make sense of what is the meaning of life, what is the purpose of my existence. You know, the little questions. And over the years, I've studied many different things. I've looked in many different avenues, and I've been educated in various ways. And I'm not here to say that I know the absolute truth of the universe, because I don't think anyone but God can know that. What I'm trying to do is share my testimony and share my experience so that maybe others can find the light that will lead them to the truth in their life. I caution anyone to approach any conversation with a presupposition, the sense of, I know what is right, therefore anything that I hear that contradicts what I believe to be right, therefore is false, therefore you are an idiot, etc., etc. It's very small-minded. And for a long time, I fell into one camp or another, just like many of us do. And it's fascinating to me, having done my own research and gone on my own journey and had my own experiences to end up where I am now, to see that on the other side of that fence is the exact same dynamic. This sense of everybody is so sure that they're right, and everyone is so sure that everyone else on the other side of the fence must be a moron, must be an uneducated idiot of some type. It's so small-minded, and it's so arrogant. It's so arrogant. So please know that everything that I share here is because I feel called to. I feel that there is a calling on my life, and I've felt that my entire life, though I have not always understood it. I have studied many different pathways. For a solid decade, maybe longer, I was in New Age. I studied astrology, I studied witchcraft, I studied shamanism, I studied all these things. I practiced them to one degree or another, but I was always connected to and aligned with God. And even when I was being misled or I was confused, and the world is so good at confusing us, I still believed that I was doing good. Through this process, I have been shown many things, and I will share each of these testimonies so that they can be witnessed. Not for attention, that is the last thing that I want. I do not want to be found or known. But I am being called to share this because we are all being called right now. So many of us sense a dramatic change happening. The evil in the world is becoming more and more prevalent and more invisible and fearless and shameless. And those of us, regardless of belief, that aim an effort to create a beautiful world that has love in it, that is safe for our children to grow up in, that is good, inherently good. Those of us that seek that aim to create it in this world, sense the rise of evil that's happening. And you can interpret that however you want. And I will say that over the last few years, I, like many of us, have been victims of this term, misinformation. There's so much manipulation and there is so much deception going on. And I finally woke up to so much of that. I started to realize that the only thing I knew was what I was told to know. And so I started deep diving into so many different things, so many different pockets, so many different areas, right to the source to say, what actually did this person say? The news, the media, the politicians, the community, the educators are all telling me one thing. This person is bad. This person is a saint. This is one way. Don't look over there. That person's so evil. If you even think about looking over there or listening to this, then you're bad. Which is interesting because it's gaslighting on a massive scale. This ability to look us directly in the eye and lie to our faces knowing that they're harming us across the board. Anyways, I woke up and I started to go, this is wrong. I know this is wrong. And what was interesting is that I started to understand it from an educated space. I have an education. I have a master's degree in science. So, every so often I will scatter my quote unquote authority around so that you can realize I'm not whatever pocket or stereotype you want to put me into. I'm not. I've been educated. I have so much information floating around in my mind that I've come across, that I've pursued to try to understand things, to try to see what it was that was calling me. I've been on all sides of the coin. I've studied science with great depth, more so than many lay people in the world who will claim science said this, science said that. Anybody who says that doesn't understand how science works. Additionally, I have actually studied things like witchcraft. I've done things that I didn't know were wrong. Now, I never actively sought harm for anyone or anything. I always looked to be good in the world, but there's a lot that happens in our own ignorance. There's a lot that we are misled to believe. There's a lot of manipulations around what it means to be kind and loving and forgiving and considerate. But you'll watch the tides turning. You'll see how people are using that against people. Well, if you're so kind and loving, you'll do what I say. That's abusive. And we are seeing massive abuses happening across the world. And we're seeing it in the United States now and in Canada and in places where we have this belief that we're free. Stuff that we would see happening in severely oppressed countries. The same exact manipulations and tactics happening here. And many people are so ignorant of history that they don't even realize it. Many people. And what I've noticed is that within our education system, there's a deliberate effort to make people ignorant, to distract people with stuff that doesn't matter, and to create these dramas for people to get sucked into that are pretty much meaningless because ultimately all the powers that be are on the same side, their own. It seems very clear that we are moving closer and closer toward the end of humanity. It's a combination of government effort to kill us off because ultimately that we don't fit into their plan. And these are not conspiracy theories, and it's so fascinating to me how readily and easily people say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. What do you mean? What does that mean exactly? Have you done any research? How can people so blatantly look at evidence, actual evidence of something, and dismiss it because it doesn't fit their narrative? Do not be so ignorant. Do not be so small-minded, and do not be so easily misled. This is what I'm inviting you to do. You don't have to believe me. It doesn't matter if you believe me. What matters is that you think for yourself. And that is something that the powers that be do not want us to do. And when I say the powers that be, I'm talking about the earthly ones, the earthly people in charge. And I don't truly believe that they are moving of their own volition. I believe they're all just puppets in a larger game. And something I've come to understand more and more recently is that Jesus is the truth, the only way. The only way. Think about this. Why is it that Christianity is blasphemed? Why is it that Jesus Christ is a curse word? No one is blaspheming Krishna. No one's blaspheming Buddha. People aren't even blaspheming Allah. Why? Start to look at this stuff. Start to look at the way the world works. Start to look at why are Christians so vilified. It's fascinating. And I'm not talking about the church, and I'm not talking about the history of the, again, earthly abuses of power, because that has gone on for as long as humans have existed. If you want to get into biblical understanding, as long as the devil's been around. We can't just blatantly trust something because it has a cross on it, or because it has a label on it, or because it says it's good. That's becoming more and more obvious. But if you move away from the corruptions of humanity, which ultimately are the corruptions of the devil, if you move away from that and you go back to the truth of what Christ is and was and will be again, the truth of God, it is just love. It is just love. Except we don't understand. We don't understand how significant our sin is. We don't understand all the little ways in which that adds up. Because we don't think like God. We think like humans with a lot of earthly and dark influence. And when we start to look around and compare ourselves to the people, the sinners of the world that are such sinners, it's easy to cast ourselves in light and say, I'm good. I'm not murdering anybody. I'm not shipping children across the world and doing horrible things to them. I'm not that evil. But what history has taught us and what we're starting to see now is that it's little baby incremental steps of acceptance of evil to say, oh, well, that's not so bad. Or, well, I guess that makes sense. Well, everyone else is doing it. Well, if I don't say anything, then it'll be fine. Oh, if I say something, I'll get backlash, or I'll get excommunicated, or I will get pushed out of society or shunned. I don't want to make this difficult for myself or my family. I don't want to make this difficult, so I'll just keep laying down my freedoms, my rights, my beliefs. I'll just keep laying down until they put the mark of the beast on me and I go straight to hell because I was too afraid to speak the truth. I'm not going to do that. And if I can help someone, any single one soul in this entire world, then I will. I pray to God that my children are saved. I pray to God that my husband finds God before Jesus gets here. I pray to God that every soul is saved, every single one, even the ones that have been corrupted by evil, that the devil be rebuked and cast out of each of them, and that every soul go to heaven. That is my prayer in Jesus' name. And since I feel it so heavy on my heart, I feel it so heavy on my soul that this is happening now. And I'm a human. I don't know what else to do. I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray to God that I am enough. I'm going to pray to God that every one of us are enough and that He forgives us. I know that so many people believe and want to believe that God is just love. And you die and everyone goes to heaven and every experience is the same and it's all okay. And gosh, it'd be great if that were true, but what if it's not? What if it's not? I didn't come to Jesus in childhood. It wasn't something that was taught to me. The truth, the way, the life. Of course it is. There's no question. There's no hesitation. It wasn't like that for me. I grew up in a family that was half Catholic and half Muslim. Very, very different sides of the coin when you get down to it. But growing up, I lived in a very, very tolerant family in a world that was very integrated. I grew up with people of all colors and creeds, and that wasn't strange to me at all. That's why it got really weird in the last few years when everyone was talking about racism, and I grew up with people of every color and every creed, and there was no problem there. Yeah, there were historically issues. Yes, there were gangs in certain parts of the nearby areas, but at my school, we were just all cool with each other. It didn't matter because we had been raised to just see that people were the same. And it was interesting because our parents had lived through race riots. So there was this concerted effort, and even in education, for this sense of equality. So we just acted that way because that's what happens. You influence children and they grow up to have a certain vision of the world that becomes reality. But what we're seeing now is the opposite. Kids are being taught that racism, it exists and will never ever go away, but it only is one direction. And if you think this way or feel that way, then you're a racist. If you exist one way or another, then you're a racist. And if you are of a certain color, you will always be oppressed, and the world is not here to help you. And that is horrifying. That is horrifying. That is not the world I'm raising my kid in. All people are created equal under God. Our Constitution says this. Our Constitution says it. In God we trust is on our money. How is it that people have vilified God so much? And yet, here's the irony. People want to dismiss God. They want to dismiss the Bible, which, as I've gone deeper into understanding, is one of the most valid historical documents to ever exist. And yet people say, oh, it's just some made-up story, just like, an explanation of stuff we couldn't understand, and man wrote it, and it's been translated, and it's been falsified, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I believed all that too. I heard all that too. I did. But the further I go into research, the more I realize that's not actually true. And there is so much evidence to show that there's biblical truth. Physically, in this world, there's evidence of it. Except we've all grown up with a narrative of evolution. The world's billions and billions of years old. So therefore, the Bible must be wrong. And not only that, everyone who believes in it must be an idiot. It's interesting how absolutely we have accepted specific theories as truths, to the point where people are willing to die for it. And it's funny because I have also studied science in great depth, to where I realize there are so many holes in the evolutionary theory. There's so many holes in the science that people just assume is true because it's been labeled as science instead of God. There is so much ignorance that is rampant in this world. And what's fascinating to me is people keep putting on these labels with such pride and ego. Well, I believe in science. Well, I believe in God. Well, I am a this or I am a that. As if it's some point of pride to say, therefore I have all the answers. What arrogance. What ignorance. And gosh, does it make us so easily led. So easily manipulated. This word is going to be called Think for Yourself, because that's really what it's about. And this is the thing that I try to teach my children, because I know they're in an environment where they're being indoctrinated. I was deeply indoctrinated when I went to graduate school. Thank God I actually learned some science, and specifically learned how science works, so that when I got to this point in life, when the entire world is being lied to, I could say, this doesn't make sense. In the most basic form, the response that I saw happen in 2020, in 2021, and 2022 make no medical sense, make no psychological sense, make no developmental sense, make no scientific sense. And here is the problem. When all of us who had that education spoke up and said, this doesn't make sense. Why are you doing it this way? This is unsafe. Actually, there's no evidence for that. They just screamed louder and said, you are a conspiracy theorist. You are a liar. You are full of misinformation. We will threaten to take away your license. We will threaten to basically end your life in one capacity or another if you do not fall in line. What does that sound like? That does not sound like a free America. That sounds like a dictatorship. That sounds like a terrifying situation. And it's interesting because I have noticed over and over and over again our political leaders essentially telling on themselves. They say what they are doing in accusations of their opposition. And it is fascinating to watch. It's also terrifying because you see people around you rising up in mass hysteria saying, we will die for this, and they don't even know what they're talking about. They don't even know what they're talking about. And that is truly terrifying. The ignorance and the arrogance and the unwillingness to even listen to one another. People aren't even able to have conversations anymore. College students come out of college learning that the only way to get what they want is to scream really loud and throw a tantrum until they get it. And to some degree, that's worked. But it's really problematic. Our colleges are not educating people how to think or how to create a valid argument or to prove something with evidence. They are being taught, believe a narrative and scream loudly and demand that your demands be met. And by the way, we'll let you know what those are. And they're too ignorant to know any different. And this is a really terrifying time because people do not understand how little they understand. And it's ironic, really, because we live in a time where there is so much information available at all times to everyone. But people don't know what's right and what's wrong, and they don't know what's real and what's false. They don't know how to identify something valid from something that's garbage. And there's so much that is polluting the airways that people can't even find the real information. And the real information that exists out there is being censored and being hidden and being discredited. I've gotten to the point now, if something's discredited, the first thing I do is go to the source and validate it or not. Is it real? Is it a lie? What do I think? And I have enough education and enough life experience, and I've seen enough to know. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I know better than other people. There are many, many people out there in the world that are much smarter than I am, and that's the truth. And I have no issue with that. But I refuse to allow any government, any organization, any mass hysterical mob to insist that I must believe something and not think for myself. I was given a brain. I was given an intellect. I was given an intuition. And I was given a soul. And I have directives. And I see the storm coming. And so many of us see the storm coming. Think for yourself. Feel for yourself. Trust your intuition. Prepare. I don't know exactly what it is we're supposed to prepare for. I've been getting emergency supplies. I don't know what to think. I don't know if there is a real rapture or not. I think it's a lovely idea, and I sure hope I pass that test. And I've been praying that every child, every innocent is raptured and is taken away before this gets really frightening. But I know there are horrible things happening in the world right now. And there are horrible things that have been happening for so long that we've been turning away from, that we've been in denial of, that have been hidden from us. I know this now. Many of us know this. What do we do about it? What do we do? I have no idea how this will be received. I do not know. I imagine similarly to anything that is put out in the world on the internet. One, it'll be suppressed for the most part. I've done a very good job not using any specifics that could be identified. So there's one piece. The second piece is half of the people will say, I praise Jesus, I agree with you, and by the way, here's all the ways in which you are wrong. Let me educate you. There'll be others that say, you're going to hell because you did witchcraft. There'll be people who say, you're an idiot, I can't believe you believe in any of this stuff. Vote blah, 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 they'll save us. There's all kinds. There are people who will read into all the non-specifics that I didn't say and tell me I am a bigot or a racist or whatever ist or ism that suits them, and as whatever enemy they decide to put me in. That's fine. I'm trying to decide whether or not I am going to hide the hate. Am I going to move through this as a protector and create only a safe space? Am I going to allow it to play out? I find that anytime I comment on something, it's met with about a 50-50 split. Half of the people are mocking me for feeling or thinking any of it, and the other half are saying, yeah, me too. So that pretty much isn't a representation of what I see in the world as is anyways. I'll determine that later. Let's see what happens, but I pray that God protect all of these messages that I share, because there are so many things that have happened over the years that I haven't shared with anyone. For the obvious fear I think many of us feel is people are going to think I'm nuts. Am I nuts? Am I losing my mind? Is this just imagination? On and on and on. All those doubts just keep creeping up because it's human nature, and the world teaches us. It's a strange dichotomy. The world teaches us to both think that all of this is illusionary and imaginary and pretend, and you're foolish for believing in God, and you're foolish for believing in Jesus, and what do you think? He's just going to blah, 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 blah. We know this. We've all heard it, right? That's one piece of it. Yet at the same time, people have tarot cards and rabbit's feet, and they knock on wood, and They don't want a black cat to cross their path, and they celebrate all of these holidays they don't know anything about, like Halloween. And it's so ironic. They're making deals with the devil. It's so ironic to me that people are so insistent that God doesn't exist, yet they act as if there is magic in the world, that there is this mystical divine ability for things to happen. It's so blind. It's so strange. And I can just see people parroting back the things that they've heard in the world. This doesn't come or originate from someone's own sense of things, from their own experience and their own understanding. It doesn't come from that. And it's easy to be a critic. It's easy to be a cynic. And cynicism is so sad because people are so afraid to look foolish that they choose not to believe in anything. Again, this makes you so easily led. This makes people only motivated by earthly desires and pleasures. If there's no moral authority, if there's no reward for good behavior, then who cares, right? Murder your neighbor, steal stuff, whatever, as long as it makes me happy. I just don't believe that's how we're built. I don't believe that's what this all is about. And I will say, I'm moving into faith now, when before I don't think I had faith. I had hope, and I had intuition, and I started to have a lot of mystical experiences that I couldn't explain, and I didn't understand, so I knew I hadn't imagined them, because typically when we imagine something, we have forethought. We plan it to some degree. We envision it. But many of these things just came upon me. They just showed up, and I didn't quite know what to do with that. I really didn't know what to do with that. And for years, it took me to start to understand it and piece it together like a big puzzle. And I'm starting to do that now. And I could still be wrong. I understand that. But one thing I couldn't deny is that all these experiences were leading me to something. And what that ended up leading me to was Jesus. All these different experiences and educations and knowings and different pursuits brought me to Jesus. That might not happen for you, but I hope it does. Because more and more, I just know this is the truth. So please think for yourselves. Please follow your intuition. Please study. If you feel like that can't be right, go look and find out. And find an opposing view and read that one and see which one adds up to more reality than the other. Do your research. Don't be afraid to find an answer that you didn't expect. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Don't be so prideful that you can't even consider a viewpoint that you were told to think was false, or you were told to think was wrong, or you were told to think was something undesirable. Because otherwise you're just a puppet. Don't be a puppet. Think for yourself. You were given a beautiful brain. And in recent days, you were given a massive internet. There is nothing that is unreachable to you, but you need to develop discernment. You need to be able to realize, is this garbage or is this truth? And no, you don't have a PhD in absolutely everything, but even if you did, to be honest, I don't know if it would even help you. Trust your gut. And if you haven't started praying, start praying. Because you might not think that this is real, but I'm pretty sure it is. And if it's real and you're not praying to God, who are you listening to? Who's guiding you? Because I've seen enough to know that there's real darkness in the world. There is real darkness. And if you can't see that, then you're blind. Stop focusing on the people. Focus on what's beyond that. There are greater powers at play here. We're talking about spiritual warfare. And if you're so blinded by the individuals and you can't see that everybody is just being misled, I don't know if I can help you. But if you're listening 30 minutes in, then maybe there's some hope. Maybe there's a spark in you. Maybe there's a spark in you that knows. A little light in you that's been talking to you saying, hey, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't match up with what I've always known inside of me. This doesn't make sense with what I see, all the miraculous nature of this world. People are not our enemies. Nature is not our enemy. It's much bigger than that. I promise you the devil is real. I've experienced enough of it to know that. But I also promise you that God is so much greater, so much more powerful. So don't let the devil scare you. He can't create anything on his own. All he can do is create deception. I wish you blessings in this life. I pray that you come to know God, to truly know God, because that's what God wants, is to know you and for you to know him. Talk to God. No one else has to know. We call it prayer. You don't have to go make a big show of it, but you do need to get to know God. You do need to start listening to your spirit. You need to start listening. It's not just about asking for what you want. It's about listening for guidance and direction. And I'll tell you from my own experience, it's often quite cryptic. Sometimes it's overt and obvious and repetitive, and you're like, well, thank you, I appreciate that. But it's incredible how we can be shown these miraculous signs and wonders and still not believe. Still try to convince ourselves that maybe I imagine that. Maybe I'm just making it into something that it isn't. Or maybe God's talking to you, loud and clear. Maybe God's been trying to talk to you for a long time. It's time to start listening. God bless you. In Jesus' name.